Hello, 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 and welcome to the 20th episode of Mixed Media Reviews. My name is Kelsey, and today I'll be talking about a movie. This week's movie is Palm Springs. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First, I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to be putting out the 20th episode, and this has been really fun for me. Second, I wanted to mention that I think I'm going to be doing a more season type of format, where I'll be taking more breaks and things. I'm going to be thinking more about that and what that exactly is going to be entailing. I don't want to have too big of breaks, but I also don't want to have episodes every single week for the rest of my life, or however long that I do this. After I figure that out, I will definitely let you guys know. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss was, the schedule in general. I like doing once a week with the occasional extra episode on Wednesday or Thursday, and I'm going to try really hard to stick to that, as well as the aforementioned seasonal schedule once I figure that out. But I did want to point out that I am diving back into my exams. And for those of you that are not my brother, I am currently taking exams to become a registered architect. My next one is going to be in mid-April, so just in a couple weeks. And then I have about 4 more after that I'll be spacing out over the next year. 4? Yeah, 4. Oh, whew. Anyway, I'll let you know on Instagram and Facebook if an upcoming exam is going to derail any of these scheduled episodes, but I'm hoping I can keep them up and keep them up on time. Though, of course, my exams will be coming first because they're very expensive and I don't want to retake those. But I will try to make sure that I stick to the schedule as close as possible and give you guys a warning if I can't. But yeah, okay, thanks for sticking with this, and let's dive in. When I first watched this movie, I had absolutely no idea what it was about, which is per usual, of course. I had just come across it on Hulu. I believe it had just come out when I watched it, and I saw Andy Samberg, and I was like, sure, I'm in, and I clicked and I watched it, which turned out to be the best way to watch this movie. I also assumed that there'd be some comedy, but really I had no idea what I was in for. I almost don't want to tell you at all in this video what this movie is about in the summary section. Seriously, if you have not seen it, stop listening to this and watch it first. The opening season is definitely a little crass, but it's genuinely a really good film. And I don't want to give anything away if you haven't seen it, because like I said, it was a perfect way to watch this movie, having absolutely no idea what was happening when you go into it. Basically, if you insist on knowing something about this movie prior to watching it, just know that it's a movie about a guy attending a wedding. That's all you need to know. Okay, so this movie is about, as we all know because we've seen the film, because I mean it, if you haven't seen it, get out of here. Because once I say this, there's no going back. And when I say what it's about and you haven't seen it, you're gonna then want to see it. Okay, I think that got rid of them, guys. Probably. They better be out of here. But anyway, Palm Springs is about Niles, played by Andy Samberg, reliving the same day over and over again. The wedding his girlfriend is a bridesmaid for. One day, the same day, but many same days later, Sarah, played by Kristen Milioti, follows Niles into a cave despite protests by Niles. She then wakes up and realizes that today is yesterday. Again. You guys, I was so blown away by this movie. I was not expecting anything more than just a typical Andy Samberg film, which honestly would have been great. I love Andy Samberg. I love Hot Rod, one of my go-to rewatch movies. I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I love all the Lonely Island stuff like Popstar, Never Stop Stopping. That one's hard to say. Bash Brothers, like all the SNL skits, Laser Cats, all pure genius. So I would have been totally okay if this was just one of those things. But it's not. It's not the typical Andy Samberg film or TV show that you would think. Although, much like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it is full of depth and has excellent writing, and it's smart and it's quick. And again, it's not that I don't normally like his stuff, but this was just that different level, that Brooklyn Nine-Nine level, but maybe even better. I love that this movie opens up by just us diving into it, and we, as an audience member, don't know what's happening yet. We just see a guy who seems depressed and unhappy, but we don't realize that this is already way into the story for him. It's not until much later, when Roy appears, and when it becomes the next day, that we understand he's been there for a very long time. And then all the previous dialogue and scenes just make so much more sense. On the second watch, this becomes so much more obvious. When you're in on the events, you can see how this is just another of the same day. His dialogue with Jerry in the pool, how he's locking eyes with Sarah in the reception and just flowing perfectly through the dance floor, where he brings Sarah to where his girlfriend is cheating on him, and he says, needing a leg up, right before you hear the girlfriend say, hold my leg up, and Niles acts like this was just some coincidence, when you now know he knew she'd say that because he'd been there so many times before. It all clicks, and I love that. I love not knowing and then rewatching it and seeing all the little clues to give that away. This is such a great way to introduce us to these characters. To have, Niles, a character who we don't really see get stuck, who we don't really know much about previously, who we just kind of accept is just this random guy. I love that blank slate we kind of get of him. We don't really know his past. We don't know how it's all happened. We don't know, the first stumbles and whatever until he kind of lets us in on those little tidbits. And then we get to see the quick explanation, through Sarah's eyes. We get that same shock to her system that she does, that he's reliving this day and that now she is reliving this day. And it just makes her journey that much funnier to me. When Niles is commenting about her going through the suicide phase and him just being real casual when they first get stuck. I just love the rapport in that scene of him just going, it's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about. And she's just like, that I might have heard about. And it's such a good scene and a great way to start the film off. I also really like that throughout the film, it's very clear that Niles knows a lot about the rest of the wedding guests since he's, been around them for so long. But each time, no one has any idea who he is. He constantly has to explain he's Misty's boyfriend, and multiple times we hear him referred to as Misty's boyfriend. No one really knows his name. Even Roy can't remember it when he goes to see him at his house until Sarah. And so then it even makes more sense that, of course, they form this connection and he falls for her. And, that connection is more important because she's the only person who knows his name among, all the millions of other reasons why they, bond together, being stuck in an infinite time loop together. Overall, I think it was just a really cool take on the whole time loop, time travel, Groundhog Day thing. Obviously, it's not an entirely original concept, but it definitely feels original while watching it. The addition of the science at the end, the cave, the dinosaurs, the mystery of how it even started, how they ended it, or how maybe they just got past November 9th. More about that in a minute. It was all really well done, while still feeling like an almost lighthearted comedy. A great rom-com that's not too rom-com-y. But all of these things made the movie feel much more original than it kind of is, because that's, Groundhog Day's kind of been done, but they did it just so well that it felt very fresh. I also really loved the cast. I mean, you have two greats like J.K. Simmons and Peter Gallagher in the same film. How could you go wrong there? And of course the aforementioned Andy Samberg and Kristen Milo. I already forgot how to say her name. Had to look it up again. Kristen Milioti. I don't know why I can't get stuck in my brain. Did I say in my bread? I don't know. Obviously, my brain has problems. But yeah, they were great. I loved them. I also loved Tyler Hoechlin. Always love a good Teen Wolf reunion. And of course, Camila Mendes, who's in Riverdale, which I did watch for some time. But I think they all did a really great job in their roles. Once again, I love getting to see, Andy Samberg kind of dive in, which kind of brings me to my next point is I love that the whole movie is pretty funny, but that they do take some parts more seriously and they let us kind of sit in those more serious moments a little bit before kind of going back to the fact that this is a comedy. Andy Samberg, like I was just saying, did such a good job in this, and I love when comedies and famous comedic actors take the time to actually let us feel something other than just, laugh at the funny bits. Palm Springs is maybe not the perfect example of this, but I think it's a really good example of mixing comedy with those more serious moments and doing it really well. Here's something that I was actually putting in the criticism at very first, but then I did more research about it and was looking up more things, and I put it up into the what I like section. I'm still unsure about it, but let's dive into this because it seems like it may not be an inconsistency like I thought it was. So at the end of the movie, we see Roy, and we get a hint at how it kind of works for the people trapped in the time loop and what happens to those that get out. We see Niles not recognize Roy at the end, so that seems to me that this time event is kind of unrelated to the real timeline, kind of a branch from the timeline that is maybe fully self-contained. Think of maybe like the Langoliers movie, if that's not a totally random reference or something. So maybe it's like this separate, fully self-contained piece of time, like a room in a house that's not really connected to the room or to the house anymore. We see that Niles and Sarah have all their memories from the time that they were trapped once they've gotten out and they've moved through, when they're sitting in the pool and the owners come home. But a version of themselves still exists in that time loop. So when they leave, a version of themselves maybe stays behind, or perhaps is restarted or rebooted. And that's probably closer to their original selves from that original night. Also, side note, I think the Nana character is also reliving that day. I did look into it, and there's a lot of people who feel the same, while others are also like, no. And the writers are not forthcoming about this. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. Whatever you think probably is true for you. It's like the way that she told Niles that she'd been to a lot of weddings in her day, which is kind of hinting at Niles' own response to her statement. And then, of course, at the end, when she tells Sarah that she'll probably be leaving, knowing that, like, what does she mean by leaving? I've heard maybe she just has dementia. Maybe it's Sarah from the future and she's learned how to time travel into this past point. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the time loop has an end and then it restarts. That just popped in my head. I don't know. But anyway, who knows? So we see that this alternate version exists, right? Where there's Niles and Sarah, assume Sarah, in this version where Roy still is, that don't know him, that haven't had those experiences. But when Sarah says she tested her theory with the goat disappeared. So wouldn't the goat still exist? Perhaps a better line would then be that it didn't recognize her anymore. However, maybe this actually means that they didn't get out of the time loop. The goat wasn't there anymore, but Niles was. So maybe they're now trapped in November 10th, the following day. Also, when it pans out from the pool and looks out over the desert, those dinosaurs are back. So are they still in some weird time where it's not the real time period? Or was that just a funny callback to, hey, look, remember when we had dinosaurs in the movie? I don't know. But also maybe, people have also said that maybe she was lying about the goat, but that doesn't really make sense. People have said she meant the goat wasn't there anymore, meaning that she wasn't recognized by the goat, or that I don't know. What does the goat mean? What does anything mean? I found an interview in Vulture magazine where the filmmakers talked about how every single thing in the film is intentional, from the wardrobe to dialogue to props, which is, going to make it really fun for more rewatches in the future. It's all supposed to be intentional. So maybe this is also intentional, the thing with the goat. I also saw that maybe when Sarah said the goat was gone, she meant that the goat she knew was gone, which I had also said, but now I'm saying again. But again, why wouldn't the goat no longer recognize her? Why would she say it was gone and not that it just didn't recognize her anymore? I feel like I'm kind of losing my mind here, and I think that's the point of this movie. it would make more sense that those who leave this time loop are still there, as that day of November 9th still exists in that time loop, but that their memory of those events would be wiped, right? That checks out. They'd be the originals. But then what about the goat? I don't know, because obviously if they were in the time loop and they got out of the time loop, obviously what Roy's experiencing when he meets up with these, time wiped, memory wiped Niles guy, he wouldn't have the same event. So he wouldn't go into the time loop, which would create that paradox of if he doesn't go in the time loop, then he doesn't do all the things, he doesn't get Sarah stuff, they don't, come out the other end with all their memories. So obviously it's kind of separate. Like they got into this weird alternate dimension timeline thing and then they were able to pop back out of it, but that means there's still like the original people get reset. I think I'm just looking more into this. I mean, maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure it out. Maybe this movie is, like I said, just doing what it's supposed to do by making us go insane by analyzing all these details. Maybe this is a valid criticism. Maybe it's not a valid criticism. Maybe it's supposed to make us think. I don't know. Let's just go to the one thing that I'm going to say is my critique. Okay. What I think is really the only criticism I think that I have for this movie, because I do kind of like that there is not a finite answer, right? Like there's not a definite, this is the answer. But anyway, let's stop thinking about that, Kelsey. So, I think I really just have one criticism, and like usual, I don't know how much of a critique this is either. However, I wish that they had waited for Roy to cross over with. I get that we wouldn't get that, extra scene at the end. But if Sarah's the one with all the know-how about how this works, you'd think it'd be safest for all of them to cross at the same time so that Roy doesn't, get it wrong on his own. I do appreciate that we at least get to see him, at the end and acknowledge that Sarah called him, because that was nice to know that they did think of him. Because when I was watching it the first time, I thought it was really odd that neither of them brought Roy up towards the end. I think that after Roy and Niles kind of bonded at his house, the whole Irvine thing, we'd get him saying, wait, we need to get Roy. And then Sarah could maybe say, oh, I already told him, whatever. And maybe they had a line or a scene and it slowed the pace at the end, but I feel like it would have been nice for either character to acknowledge getting him, or Sarah saying just a throwaway line of, I called Roy about this so he knows, but maybe that would spoil that little, ending where we see Roy. I don't know. I just wish we saw a little bit, because it definitely threw me off, and I was like, what the heck? What about Roy? No one is talking about Roy. Anyway, that's the end of this. I 100% obviously recommend watching this and rewatching this movie. It was such an unexpected surprise, and I'm really glad that I watched it, and I'm glad I've watched it for the second time as well, especially with so much time between. I think it's definitely one to come back to over and over and over again. See what I did there? But legit, it's definitely a good movie to watch over and over again. It's a movie that doesn't take itself seriously without, too strong of a moral to the story, but it's also just a really fun watch with smart writing and, clever situations, clever solutions, I suppose I should say, about getting out of the time loop. Definitely fun and better than, the typical rom-coms, especially like the Hallmarky ones. Not saying that there's nothing bad, or that there is something bad about Hallmark ones, but this was a good movie. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Palm Springs. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Mixed Media Reviews Podcast, and you can also find me anywhere you find your podcasts, probably. Please join me next week where I will be doing something slightly different. It will still be a book episode for sure, but I'm going to try to do 2 books I have recently read, as I'd like to talk about like both of those books and I feel like I need to do it before I forget stuff about them, while they're still kind of more fresh in my mind. I'm still going to try to keep it short, as that's the goal of all of these episodes, to be not too long so that they're kind of quick. So next week I'll be talking about With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo and Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Imide. I looked it up. I listened to her pronounce her own name like 5 times. And I even wrote down a pronunciation, and I think I still butchered it, so I'm sorry. Anyway, have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!